So welcome everyone and good day to today's webinar on engaging adolescent males in teen pregnancy prevention. My name is Patrick with RTI and I'll be helping out with the virtual room today. So just a quick note, when you log in this afternoon, your microphone will be automatically muted. But if you have any questions for presenters, please submit those into the chat window. And if you run into any issues with Zoom today, you can reach out to me there in the chat window as well. So at this time, Ricky, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricky Richard, and I am a Federal Project Officer within the Division of Optimal Adolescent Development. And I want to, on behalf of the Family and Youth Bureau, extend a very warm welcome to all of our APP grantees and other youth serving grantees, as well as our federal staff that support our youth serving organizations. And before we start our webinar, I would like to highlight the significance of National Teen Pregnancy Prevention Month. And so this month, we sort of celebrate the significant decline in teen pregnancy rates over the last 30 years. And we want to observe this month to celebrate our efforts in reducing the teen pregnancy rates for our youth and having them to live up and reach their full potential. So as you know, National Teen Pregnancy Prevention Month is not just about teen pregnancy. It's also about curating and giving the next generation of youth the tools to live healthy lives and also have healthy relationships. So during this month, it's very important to bring awareness and shout to the rooftops to your communities and in your schools and anywhere that you work that the work that we're doing is important in giving the next generation those tools to succeed. Next slide. So according to the CDC in 2020, the teen pregnancy rate dropped by 7.94% in comparison to 2019. And while this is a very significant drop in teen pregnancy rates, there is still a lot of work to be done, especially in certain demographics. So for example, African-American teen youth and Hispanic youth have a teen pregnancy rate that is twice as high as their white counterparts, and Indian and Native American youth have a teen pregnancy rate that is 3 times their white counterparts. So I think what's really important is that we continue to build on equity within our youth and certainly within certain demographics of our youth. So although we've come very far in teen pregnancy and continue to make great strides, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. And then it's awesome that you are on this call to learn more about how you can continue to forge ahead and provide these services to our youth. Next slide. So one thing I want to highlight that my team and I worked on was our digital media toolkit. So I will share the link to this digital media toolkit once I'm done presenting here. But this is a web page that has a lot of resources that can be shared with youth serving organizations, not only our APP grantees, but any youth serving organizations to really learn how to better implement programs, teen pregnancy programs, as well as highlighting the work that we all are doing. So I encourage you to share the link with your grantees and also use some of the resources to better implement your programs around the US. Next slide. So here I wanted to take some time to highlight our We Think Twice campaign. So this is a really awesome resource that is for teens and made by teens. So over the course of the campaign, we've had over 12 million Instagram impressions, as well as 90,000 web page views. And this campaign is an award-winning campaign that is for youth ages 13 to 19. And it is available not only to APP grantees, but all youth. So if you serve youth, please, I'll also drop that link into the chat as well. Please highlight that and share with your youth serving organizations. The campaign has incentives for contests that are done for the campaign. There was even a We Ask the Expert video where the youth got to interview Dr. Fauci, which is really cool. So that's also on the exchange where you can view the youth interviewing Dr. Fauci about vaccines. So we continue to highlight the work that this campaign is doing and continue to see the impact that it's making on our next generation of youth. Next slide. So a little pop quiz here. What percentage of young men aged 15 to 19 years old report they would be upset or a little upset if they were to get a female pregnant? So I'll give about 10 seconds here and you can put it in the chat and then I'll reveal the answer. So I see 80, 50, 100, 80, 50, 80, 20. Awesome, we're getting some good responses. Next slide. So the answer here is 80% of young men would be very upset or a little upset if they were to get a female pregnant. So that is an important statistic there because it highlights the work that we are doing with young men and that they want to continue to be a part of shaping their own futures and being a part of the work that we do. So that's why our theme this year is elevating voices, engaging young men in teen pregnancy prevention. So I will have and pass the mic over to Michelle, who will go over the agenda and also the webinar objectives. Thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky. As Ricky said, we are so happy that you're here with us today. Here's a look at what we plan to cover. First, we will have Hector Sanchez Flores talk about strategies, lessons learned, and sharing of his experience working to engage young men. Then we will hear from two grantees on their experiences engaging young males, one from Bristol Hub and then a second from Teleku. After that, we will have a Q&A session. Next slide. Here are the objectives that we hope will be achieved. So the first is to discuss how male youth can be engaged to address harmful gender stereotypes that can perpetuate negative outcomes, including those related to pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections. The second objective is to identify at least two strategies to increase recruitment and retention of male youth in their programming. The third objective is to gain understanding of real-time strategies used from the two grantee spotlights that we'll hear from, Bristol Hub and Teleku. And then the fourth is to reference at least one resource to learn more about engaging male youth in pregnancy and STI prevention programming after today. Next slide. So considering those four objectives, we'd like to hear from you. Which one are you most looking forward to? So you should see a poll pop up on your screen where you can select which of the four objectives you're most looking forward to. And many of you all are already answering. We'll give it just a few seconds. Let's see. Okay, so we've got about 64% participating in our poll, and it looks like discussion of how male youth can be engaged to address harmful gender stereotypes is our leading objective. Hector is going to be sure to talk through that in his portion, and then learning two strategies to increase recruitment and retention of male youth came in second, followed by hearing strategies from your fellow grantees, as well as referencing one resource. Thank you for participating in that. Next slide. We've got another poll question for you. Curious about what funding stream you are representing today. So another poll question should pop up for you. And if you could let us know who you are representing, which funding stream you're calling in from today. And again, we'll let this go for about a minute to give everyone time to respond. Looks like we've got a good mix on the call. Okay, things are slowing down. Yep, so as expected, a pretty good mix here with our state prep grantees leading the way. And again, we hope that you find this information beneficial and are here to support you throughout this webinar with any questions that you have and beyond with any questions or technical assistance that may be needed. Let's move forward. I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and transition it to our guest speaker, Hector Sanchez Flores, who will introduce himself. Take it away, Hector.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everybody. I want to just, before I introduce myself, I want to express my appreciation to RTI and you specifically that hand walked me in preparation for this, as well as to be included with the wonderful guests that are going to be part of this webinar who do incredible work in their own right. And so it's an honor to be represented here. I'm going to introduce myself the way I would if I was in the community in Mexico where my family's from, and in that community, they would never ask me what my name was. They would ask me who I belonged to. And when I would answer that question as a little boy, as a very young little boy, I knew to begin by mentioning my grandparents by saying I'm the grandson of Maria de la Luz Orozco de Flores and Ildefonso Flores Enriquez, Maria Andrea Valdez Jara de Sanchez, and Guadalupe Sanchez. And by answering in that way, they knew who I belonged to, who my parents were, Gaudencio and Selena. And with that came some expectations. And so I've lived in I was born in California, lived here, and I've worked in the field of teen pregnancy prevention. Man, that was where I began my career, probably like 28, 29 years ago. I now serve as the executive director of the National Compadres Network. And so I remain connected to many of the people that have done this work historically in California and beyond. And so it's really a blast from the past when Katie reached out and Michelle followed up to get me to be a part of this. So I'm eager to share that, and I'll share a little bit about our work. Next slide. There's a lot written here. It just tells you about the National Compadres Network. We're an organization that works to strengthen and rebalance and develop traditional extended family kinship that helps us achieve the goals that we want within our own families and by extension, the communities that we serve. Next slide. This is an underlying core of our work, and I will read. It's the founder's message. It says that whatever we're working towards within the collective dignity, love, trust, and respect of all people exists the wisdom and resources for a beautiful and harmonious tomorrow. This is the underpinning of our work, of working with communities to co-create and to collaborate on what it is that communities are working towards and how we can support that journey and lend expertise and guidance. So that's what I hope you take away about our work. Next slide. I wanted to share because, some people that are working in teen pregnancy prevention may not know the origins of where teen pregnancy prevention or where prevention efforts were rooted. I think it's important to call that out, that historically, when I started doing this work 28 years ago, teen pregnancy prevention was directed at young women. I mean, for a good reason. They experience the primary responsibility, and whatever came after a pregnancy, it fell on their shoulders. And so we invested a lot of time in that. But then there was a point when somebody did a kind of a survey, and they realized that there was a scarcity of information and clinical services designed specifically for males. Now, there was general information, but it was not designed so that young men could listen, understand, and take action. And there was limited funding, and there was virtually no evaluation of programs directed at young men specifically. Next slide. What I discovered when we were doing some research, what we called in California male involvement programs, is that the very early ones in the 70s really directed men to be supporters of their partners in reproductive health. I'll explicitly say the women in their lives, right? And so we were seen as being critical intermediaries to enhancing the health of our partners. Then what followed next was that people realized in order to combat STDs and whatnot, that we were critical in condom usage. And so there were some condom education programs that existed, and young men and men were focused in that. And then what happened was then there was a secondary thing, kind of like, if you will, a threat-based method of engaging young men. And that poll at the very beginning is a very telling poll, because initially people thought young men were happy to be fathers. But so we focused on this liability of what it is to have a child, the costs associated with it. If you don't keep up with your legal and financial obligations, the arrears that take place. So it was like, it was more of a stick than a carrot. Next slide. And then programs began to emerge that saw young men as consumers. Like, we could engage them as consumers of reproductive health services. We began to see them as not, we began to see them in their own right as part of the solution to reducing teen pregnancy. And we began a partnership mentality. However, I will say that there was very little information that was outside of the heteronormative aspects of the lives of young people. And that was a limitation that at that time, 28, 29 years ago, we weren't thinking about inclusivity. We were thinking about a narrow definition of what young men were. Next slide. So when I started doing this program, we began to kind of implement a model that was Latino-centric in a Latino-based community in the coast of California and central in Santa Barbara. And we began to teach them some broader things about, like, you know, that you carry dignity within you, that you have a sacred purpose, and we respect what that sacred purpose is. And we're going to walk with you, you know, and we're going to walk with you and support you, not just when you do what we want you to do, but when you're struggling to do what you want to do. And we're going to create a trusting space that is safe for open conversations. These elements remain true in everything that we do at the National Compadres Network. And I share with you this because oftentimes we don't talk about these, what I call foundational elements that set the stage for the education and the engagement that comes later. Next slide. So we learned some things that are really important. We learned that young men wanted to be engaged in social support networks that were peers and with near peers and mentors. And those youth development programs, as they were called, were kind of rooted as the umbrella where all these other messages that we're going to talk about emerged. We wanted to nurture an environment where young men could kind of aspire to become the person that they want to be. Some people call that rites of passage, but that engagement happened because young men would come into like a 7 or 10 week education program, and then the program would shut down for a period of time. And then when it reemerged, many of the young men continue to come back, right? And we said, well, you already got the dose that we wanted, but they had liked the space so much that it forced us to create kind of layered approaches. So the base level information, using them as peer educators, sometimes hiring them as peer educators because they had begun to master the information and were critical in sharing it with others. We also began to recognize that different communities have different approaches. So we had to look at culturally rooted approaches about responsibility, about being engaged in your family. And then we began to speak directly with young men. We weren't using them, we weren't speaking to teachers, we weren't speaking to counselors, we were engaging young men. And then we began to understand the realities that young men that experience poverty, systemic community poverty, violence in communities, the effects of how it is that you're growing up sometimes with fathers that are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, mothers that were working 2 jobs to make ends meet. It was a really complex thing that, you know, we needed to understand in order to be able to serve them best. And then we linked them to services that addressed healing components, because what was never really recognized early on was the trauma that many of these young men experienced. And I'll address some of them later on. But then we began to create a vision, help them create a vision for the adults they wanted to be. Not the adults Hector wanted them to be, but the adults that they wish to be. Next slide. What surprised many, but it shouldn't surprise us, is that young men were willing and receptive to learning the information as long as it was made relevant to them. You know, our families all don't look the same. So if you come in with a mindset of what a family should look like, then you will lose those young men that come from families that don't look like the mother and father in every home, because they didn't pick those families, and those families were influenced by external factors. And you needed to understand that very, very clearly. That there are many ways that we taught, that we engage them, because maybe their fathers weren't physically in the home, but some of the fathers were still engaged with the family, and some fathers were absent from the family in the lives of the children. And so we were asking young men what it is that they aspire to become. You know, that was really important. And always creating a space of welcoming that said that there is no one way that a family should look, but you should be a part of the discussion of how you want to form a family. And then we made the content very accessible to them. And we didn't talk about clinical services if we hadn't built the capacity for clinical services. That was something that I think we learned early on, that you couldn't say, oh, you need to go to a clinic to get screened for STDs, and then know that nobody was willing to receive them there. And then we addressed, you know, the unhealthy aspects that young men get socialized to understand. And we were very, very, very clear about that. So the misogyny that was unspoken about, oftentimes we spoke about. The homophobia that had infiltrated our mind, we spoke about how it is that we can be part of solutions, not just the problem, is very, very important. And in fact, we balanced prevention messages with promotion messages, which was really important, because these young men were being bombarded with prevention messages. Don't do this, avoid this, don't do that. And there was no beacon to walk towards. Next slide. We also addressed the concept of family formation, because these young men maybe had never been part of that conversation, or nobody had sat them down to do this. And this we did with the guidance of the families as well. And so we gave them information on family life education, about the things that you want to achieve, how we can support you in that process, usually centered on education at that point. You know, how it is that you stay in school. How can we strengthen your ability to sustain in school? We made it culturally centered. Many of these young men were Latinos or Latinx of Mexican heritage. And so we understood, and we worked with their families to say, what is it that your family wants for you? And what do you want for yourself? And then we talked about the uncomfortable thing about historic gender norms that existed within our minds, within our families, and within our broader community. And how is it that we wanted to create partnerships moving forward? And the biggest part of it is, what would you like your family to look like, right? And I remember young men would like look at you kind of perplexed. And I'm like, would you like to have children? Do you want to have two? Do you want to have three? Some young men say, well, I want to have a boy. Well, what if you get a girl, right? You know, all of these things were very important part of the conversation because young men weren't part of that engagement strategy historically. Next slide. We talked about, if it is that you wish to be a father, if you wish to have children, what kind of, you know, you have the ability to choose whether you want to be a father or not, you know, and that was something that, you know, some of them had never really quite thought about. What kind of father you want to be? Will you have to deconstruct some unhealthy attitudes of being a father? How do you develop effective co-parenting and communication strategies? Those are very, very important things. And then teaching them about child development and nurturing was also something that many of the young men had never had, because they had never had opportunities to take classes. And they would tell us, those classes in our school are offered to the girls, not to us. That was their language at the time. And I think that we began to push back and saying, you know, in our community, we want all young people and adults to be prepared to be parents. Next slide. The hardest part was getting clinical services for young men. in our community. It was easier in other communities, but in our community, it was usually designed for young women. And they would tell them, you can't come on every day. Every day, there's a day that's specifically designed for young men to come into clinical services. Those days are long gone, but I'm talking about the original effort to do clinical services for young men. Now in California, we have school-based clinic saturation in many parts, not all parts. The Central Valley always struggles with that here in California. We had community-based services that were in addition to clinical services that were really, really important. The psychosocial things, job, part-time job, all those things that were important for young men to live their truth. And then the other part, which oftentimes got overlooked, is how do they have somebody help them address their traumas? And that was through behavioral health services. So when you work with young men, a young man that comes into your presence, you don't know what lies beneath the surface. And so having a cadre of services and referrals available are really, really important. Next slide. So all of those things hopefully point to this slide right here. These are the things that oftentimes we have to really be cognizant when you're working with, I would say not just with young men, but all populations. But these were the things that we were addressing with young men, including at the time, we didn't call it consent and communication. We didn't. That was not the attitude. It was really couched in date rape and that kind of behavior. Now things have changed because I know that because I work with people, and so the conversation has shifted to consent and communication, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But we talk about fatherhood and co-parenting, and we're going to now shift because Michelle is going to conduct a poll to, I think, ask a question related to this slide.
That's right, Hector. So we are interested in knowing which of these strategies you are already implementing, as I trust that many of you are. Next slide, please. So you will see a poll come on up to ask, based on the strategies that Hector referenced, which are you currently implementing? And you can select the best response. If there are others you'd like to add to this question, please feel free to add those to the chat. Juliana, I see your question about choosing one. It does look like it is a single choice, and I apologize for that, as it's not indicated by the select all that you apply. So, okay, thanks, Rita, for noting that you're doing them all. Okay, it looks like a majority of folks are talking about HIVs, STIs, and STDs, as well as educating on condom use, and consent and communication is the next leading majority. And we have a few other folks chiming in that they are implementing all strategies. Hector, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you. So I realized there was a limitation on that poll and that there's probably many people doing multiple strategies, but I do want to highlight that it's still not that far from where we were before with addressing with young men sexually transmitted infections and condom use, because I think, especially with condom use, that's the one form of prevention that they have most control over. I won't say complete control because they have to negotiate that with a partner, but it's the one that they hold most relevant control over. The additional topics that were included were the causes and consequences, and surprisingly, they knew the consequences fairly well, usually because of near peers in their community and sometimes family members. You know, a lot of times they said that they didn't get much information about their anatomy, that it was not a big part of their health education. And we focused on abstinence too, that you could choose to abstain. I remember that being a hard thing for them to really take in at first. But then when you talk about how it is that you should, you know, achieve your outcomes, your life outcomes, and have some level of control, and abstinence may be a part of that for you. I think they then understood that as a part of their context. We openly discussed relationship violence, sexual abuse, and that was really important for us to do because oftentimes some of those attitudes were rooted in cultural values that they had identified and were not actually cultural values. They were misappropriated attitudes that they had attributed to culture, their own culture of origin. And anger management, we didn't do anger, quote, management. We acknowledge that anger exists as any other emotion, but it's the one that we project outward the most and can create the most harm to other people if we don't know how to understand it better. But we openly discuss that. And then through all this process, there was introspection and reflection. How do these things relate to you? And the final one, which I remember originally they didn't like us addressing because they didn't find it relevant to teen pregnancy prevention, which was homophobia. And at the time, we felt it was important because we knew of the insidious nature of how this gets infused in the psyche of young men and the attitude that it creates afterwards, right? And so we chose to address that up front to let them know how, because many of them would never really think about it except as an external factor. But we would say that, you know, at some point, if you choose to have children, you don't know what your children are going to be. And you need to have worked through these attitudes, if you harbor homophobic attitudes, so that you could be the best parent to all your children. Next slide. The reality is that when we're talking to them about clinical services, we're talking to people and young men who are probably let's just say that I envy their health. They are in the stage of life when they are the most healthy. They usually didn't have a lot of contraindicated health things. I remember some young men would talk about asthma, but we were talking to them about their health and well-being when they were healthy, probably the healthiest stage in their lives. But we also talked about learning differences because some young men had never really discovered that. They hadn't had IAPs, and those things would come up in our classes. Oftentimes unaddressed traumas would come up. And I'm going to be really candid, is that oftentimes young men in some spaces were oftentimes seen as perpetrators of sexual assault, but we discovered in our work that there were many young men that had been victimized by that. And they didn't really share that with others. And so I think it's really important that when you address these varied topics, that you recognize that in your midst, you may have young people, just like when we do the work with young women, that many of them may have unaddressed trauma, violence in the home, violence in the community, persistent, systemic created poverty. And we were trying to normalize the concept of health checkups and a health-seeking attitude for young men. We were hoping that that would continue and sustain over time. Next slide. We were trying to really focus that they had a role in the conversations about family formation and the decisions to start families. You know, we wanted them to be active participant, not domineering participants in this discussion. We wanted to kind of remind them that if they were to manage their health well right now, that was the key for addressing future health risks that they may have or whatnot, but it was that health preserving behavior that we wanted them to have. Because sometimes they didn't value their own health because they viewed themselves as healthy, but we would remind them that this is a lifelong continuum and that they needed to take on these attitudes in order to preserve and be present for the people that they cared about the most. Next slide. So we think that when you're doing this work of prevention, and I think it's validated by the poll, that, you know, that comprehensive STD, STI, and HIV prevention includes young men. If you're trying to address these concepts in the community and you take a community health attitude, then why would you exclude young men as part of the solution to that? I think it's really important, especially if you talk about reducing unplanned pregnancies, that yes, we need information and clinical services for young men, but we shouldn't put with young women, but we shouldn't place the burden on their shoulders to ensure that that happens. That by including all members and sectors of the community, you begin to seed that community with information so that they can all work together to achieve their life outcomes. And we know, and I think this remains true, that young men have earlier sexual dates of debut, right? And so we shouldn't overlook that. We should address that right up front and include that in prevention and intervention if that debut has already taken place. I remember hearing information and reading information about really early ages of sexual debut for young men, and nobody would raise an issue, right? Whereas if it was a young woman at 13 having her date of sexual debut, there were many things that were brought up in the conversations like, that's not right. And I believe we should be thinking that way about all our young people, that we should be engaged in the health of the well-being and what is the best approach for each and every young person. And we want to normalize behaviors that help them develop and achieve their goals, whether it be academic and educational, personal or interpersonal, family formation, and then their health in general. Next slide. I had the privilege of working with health educators across the state of California. And I actually think, and I've worked with people that do prevention work, I think health educators are the rock star of prevention efforts, because they are always having to adapt to new language, to new elements of this conversation, and they do it incredibly well. And so they are the ones that develop the education strategies that serve male identifying members of our community and know how to adapt and adjust, right? And so that's always a plus in the community that I have noticed. I repeat this over and over because it's important for us to communicate to young people, young men in particular, that their health really matters, that their well-being is part of the community's well-being, right? Because if we don't do that over and over again, they don't value it within themselves. And I would want every young person that's in these programs to walk away saying, my health and well-being matters to somebody. And my health and well-being matters to not only my family, but my community as well. And looking for moments when individualized education is important and blended co-ed education is important. Because sometimes they need to have dialogues amongst their peers, inclusive of all genders. And that's an important element to always to consider. And sometimes it's important because young men perceive that their female counterparts have more information that they do. So both are probably really effective, but it really requires the health education staff to kind of know, when is it that we work together? When is it when we do unique work with each gender? Next slide. I put that first bullet there, that they should be open to updating their ways of communication, but it goes back to the previous statement, is that they do that, on jump. They know how to do this. And I'm always like, if I want to learn what's going on in the community, talk to really good health educators, because they have the pulse of the community and young people really close to what they understand. So that's an innovation that I think must continue. Integrating new information is always relevant and important because, I'm of the era. I remember hearing about VD, right? We thankfully don't use those terms anymore, but the terms around sexual health always are evolving and changing, and young people should get that new information. And creating a place where young people can ask questions, right? Really ask questions and not get shocked as health educators, because they're communicating with us with the language and understanding that they have, and validating the questions supporting them is really, really important. Next slide. This is going to go, the sheroes and heroes, right? That have the muscle to adapt and adjust to center young people is really critical. These individuals adjust because of the ethnicities that they work with, the cultural identities that young people have, the gendered identities that people have, within the community context, the health educators that I know by name that still do this work are incredible, right? They know how it is to adjust and make things work in multiple languages, bilingual languages, trilingual languages I've now seen be done. Skill sets that I don't have, but am completely blown away by. And that they recognize that not just the young men, but oftentimes their families are the real consumers of this education. I remember mothers coming into the office and asking me for what the information that I was providing for their young men. I always thought it was through a critical fear that they had that I was given inappropriate information. It was always from a centering of real gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I didn't have the ability to do this. And then the other part of it is this heroes and sheroes of health educators and program developers that do this must share the information with funders and supporters, because that's where it lags. I encountered funders that said, oh, we want you to do this. And it was lagging by 5 or 6 years, right? And oftentimes because they said, well, there's no evidence to support that. Really, we weren't changing content. We were changing or adjusting based on delivery methodology. And so sometimes having the flexibility to work with your funders and supporters is really critical so that they can then adjust their language and their expectations as well. Next slide. So when I started doing this work, I got to collaborate with people that were part of the initiation of this work. And I have to share with you that when those programs were defunded and went away, we didn't go away. The investment that was made in the capacity in the community lives right now. Right now, these young men and health educators are now executive directors of large organizations. They went on to do community organizing in various fields. Some of them work in philanthropy as program officers in major foundations across this country. They helped develop organizational services, so some of them stayed in their community and now are major designers of how it is that you engage community within the context of organizations. Most recently, one of my close compadres was appointed, I think that his title is CEO of community-based clinics, school-based clinics here in California. He goes back to male involvement programs as long as I do. And some of us have assumed executive roles in other health and prevention programs and culturally rooted healing-centered efforts. So I say this because it was through this work that we discovered our pathway to serve our communities. And our communities may have gotten bigger, but I think those young people exist in our communities right now that are envisioning something different than even what our creative minds have come in to address problems that are persistent today. So that investment that was made has carried on in different ways. And it's important for us to create pathways for those young people to create their contributions for the health and well-being of themselves, their families, their partners, and their communities. Next slide. So these are the principles that we would say we want all young people to have. We would teach them that the most valuable thing that they had was being a person of their word. I had learned that from my grandfather. Many of our families have had that kind of history, is that your word is the most valuable thing that you have. That we have a sense of responsibility for not only our own well-being, but of others in our circle. That we take a broader sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of responsibility. That we examine and reject the forms of abuse that harms us physically or mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Not only those things that harm us, but those people that are very, very close to us. We created places and spaces where we invited young men to develop a practice to reflect and to really include ceremony in their lives. Some young men went on to do it through fraternities and sororities. Some, and I'm going to be honest, some came back and said, hey, Hector, some of that stuff isn't good, and they were committed to trying to change that. But it is to go back to the roots of their family, those things that have sustained themselves, right? That we encourage them to be not just, to be sensitive and understanding, and to abandon that other hard view of what it is to be a man, right? That some of us were inculcated with, and that we reflect these attitudes and these values with a level of clarity to one another, and we do our very best to live our values honestly and with love, and holding one another accountable, right? So this was a journey of walking with young men, you know, and if I can invite you to consider that, is that when you have a young person that's close to you, they're seeking attachment with you. And how is it that you commit to walking with them through thick and thin? And as a result of that, I know many of these young men that are now really wonderful fathers, wonderful partners, who have created families that I think are incredibly wonderful, right? And they will oftentimes say, you know, it's because of these programs. And I remind them that whatever they created was within them to begin with. They have just given it life. And that's really important, to let them carry the locus of control of what they have achieved. Next slide. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the mentors and guides that I had along the way, both women and men that were willing to invest time to teach me some information. And I share that with you because I think it's really critical that none of us are on this journey in isolation, right? Some of those mentors were professional mentors, and some of them were within my family, right? I just think it is important to adjust and attach yourself with people that are willing to learn, that are on a lifelong journey of learning, that know how to develop things so that you can do that or improve upon that. And that's not important. So what you hear from me today is not from my brain alone. It's from hundreds of people that influence my thought, my programmatic thinking, and the young people that have done this and informed me. And I'll share with you this one story that I've carried probably for 26 years. I was in a group and we would talk about young men being young men of their word, that you should not be duplicitous with people, right? And one young man was going to a party, and he then said, we always said, don't be a liar, be clear about your intentions, don't be duplicitous. And one young man said, hey dudes, we would have our group on Wednesdays. He says, this stuff works. He didn't use the word stuff. He used a different word. He says, this blank works. And I was like, whoa, he's going to validate what we did. And he says, last Friday, I was at a party. It was jumping off. And I thought, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to be honest about what it is that I want from this potential relationship. So he says, so I tried it out. And I said, hey, I'm not looking for a long-term relationship. I'm just looking for a, something right now. And she said to me, that's all I'm looking for too. And then I was stunned. I was like, oh, that's not the lesson I wanted to give, right? But it was a good communication strategy. And then I asked him, I said, and so how did it work out? He goes, well, nothing happened because I didn't have a condom. And I just thought to myself, he's practicing the muscle. He's practicing the language. And he's practicing the behavior of protecting his health and that of somebody else, right? And I think that those are things that I learned from them, that we were on the right track by empowering them. The colleagues who were deeply committed to people, Katie Sulentrop, was one of those people that, before I had children, we date back in work in this arena. Cultural leaders that informed me, like, this is what we want for our children in our community. This is not what they would want to know, whether I was reinforcing what they wanted for their children in their community. And that's part of working in co-creation with communities. And the youth development specialists that were always informing us on, like, hey, don't just do prevention work. Think about what you're promoting, right? Give them a beacon to work towards, not just things to avoid. And those are the things that I think remain true to my heart to this day. Next slide. So, I'll walk with anybody who's willing to walk in a culturally rooted way. I'll walk with anybody who's willing to remain healing centered in the work that we do. I'm willing to walk with people who have a commitment to all young people, whether they look like me or they don't look like me. And if you ever feel the need that you want to reach out, you can do so by emailing me or calling me. My hope is that it inspires you. And I'm eager to learn about what people are doing today that is different than what we did historically, because I think we are succeeding, as some of the data is starting to show that the rates are going down. And I think that's important to always celebrate. Next slide. Oh, so you can go back to the other one before I go back to Michelle. So I want to share with you that in all the times that I've had the ability to learn in both formal and informal settings, the teachers and mentors that I had never took things from me that belonged to me. They were always adding to the tools that I had. And I always walked away from those experiences, not only better for the tools that they gave me and added to me, but actually more grateful that they didn't take anything from me or said something about me that made me feel less than, or that I was not well suited to this work. And so during today's, what now been about 42 minutes of my conversation with you, if I have said something that has created an offense to you or has not seen you in who it is you are in the work that you do, then I want you to know that it's not a reflection of my teachers. That is a deep reflection only of me. And the only way I can correct that is if you were to let me know what I did that was both harmful and damaging to you. And I always welcome those opportunities to learn and grow and be better in the work that I do. Zoom is such a challenging platform, but that doesn't mean that I don't create harm. And I want you to know that I welcome both feedback that is critical or ways that I can improve what I do. With that, I just close by saying it is yours. And I'll hand it over to Michelle. I think I'm on time.
You are perfect right where you are, Hector. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. If folks have questions for Hector, you are welcome to put those in the chat. And when we get to the question and answer session, I will call on you or repeat your question for you.
Michelle, there was a question about whether these slides are going to be made available, and that may be a yes or no, but I just wanted, I don't have the power to do that, but I just wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Hector. Yes, the slides will be available. I will be sharing a PDF at the end of the webinar in the chat. So towards the end of our time together, look out for that. And when I share them in the chat, I will make that note. At this time, we are going to transition into our first grantee spotlight to hear some great information about the on-the-ground strategies that grantees are using. And for that, I will toss it to Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. So my name is Alex. I'm the Assistant Director at the Bristol Hub Teen Center, which is located in Bristol, Vermont. And I'm here to share with you some strategies that myself and coworkers have developed over the years teaching our prep course there at the Hub. So I got a couple of slides to start that are just kind of pictures to kind of make sure we're all understanding what a teen center is, and then we'll go from there. So we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So this is a picture of the Hub Teen Center. The Hub Teen Center has been around since 1998 in Bristol. It serves youth from the ages of 12 to 19. And it's an after-school drop-in center, which means teens can come and go as they please within the hours that we're open. For several years, for many years, we've been teaching prep as one of the core programs at the Hub. And I've been teaching prep since early 2019. Which has been a really special part of what we offer at the Hub. And And yeah, so this picture is actually a volunteer group, but it gives a good idea of kind of what the space looks like. And that plays a factor into the fact that we teach teens and folks about sex education through our prep class. So I just wanted to set the scene. We can go to the next slide. And give you another quick little snapshot of kind of some of the things we do. We normally serve, again, youth 12 to 19, and we offer a lot of different programs to a lot of different people. But prep has really been one of the pillars of our program. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. And I want to share some things that came to mind when we're talking about teaching prep to young youth, male youth in particular. So a couple of the things that I've condensed this down to are the less the programming is like school, the better. A lot of feedback that we've gotten from teens has been just too much lecture. There's not enough movement, not enough action. We're just kind of like doing the same thing we would normally do in school, but with a different subject. So that had been a really good sort of sentence that we kick around in our heads about, like, okay, so how can we make this more engaging, less sitting and listening, and more active? So that brings us to the second point, which is trying to engage participants with active physical activities. So my professional background is in outdoor education, which is very active, very movement oriented, very experiential. And so I've tried to bring some of those ideas into teaching the prep classes at the Hub. And so that is something we'll talk about in future slides, but is really kind of a big factor. And then we also try to always refer back to our group agreement that we make, just to keep everybody on the same page. And it's a good practice to get into, something that teens, I think, can benefit just from going through the fact that they all decided on how they should behave and what they should, like, what are the expectations, and we hold them accountable to those expectations. Finally, modeling the appropriate behavior, and I put in there especially reactions. A lot of times teens will say things to try to get a reaction out of us, the teachers, the instructors, just to kind of test boundaries and see what you're going to say. So kind of expect that, and really remembering that you're modeling for the teens that are just trying to like figure you out. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So going back to the school point, we've talked to youth, and they kind of identified the fact that they have to sit, they have to follow general school rules. They're often graded, and they don't often get a chance to tell the teacher what they think. And so in prep classes, we try to do the opposite of all those. We try to encourage kids to move around. We try to give them things to do physically. We always try to follow the group agreement, again, focusing on expectations that the participants themselves have created, has proven to be most successful. We don't really, again, we don't give them grades. We focus on gaining an experience and a memorable lesson. And we're kind of there to help them remember, as opposed to, assess whether or not they did certain things. And finally, we try to do debriefs as often as we can, so that we're actually taking feedback from the participants, and we're acknowledging their voice, which is a really key factor. And a lot of these ideas have come directly from those debriefs. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so yeah, trying to make things kinesthetic that are inherently not is a big challenge. So I put in there, it's kind of like the $1 million question is how can we make some of the lessons that are typically lecture heavy, how can we make them hands-on? So really trying to reduce the amount of sitting and listening, just on a simple fact, like, move around, move to a different part of the room, or be standing when you're doing something as opposed to sitting. A lot of the teens that we teach are just antsy all the time, and they need to keep their bodies moving. We try to incorporate physical examples, so real life things, passing things around. Watching videos is really helpful, can create a good background, but really being present and concrete and physical has really helped. So sometimes we just put a random action or a random a way to choose somebody to do something and turn that into a physical thing. So like an example is if we do a review game about something that we've talked about, rather than like you choose your category, like on a Jeopardy board, imagine, we have them roll a dice. We have them throw a dart in a dartboard or something that like engages their body just enough for them to treat it as a little bit different, as a little bit more than what they're used to. And then like, yeah, passing a ball around or doing something at the beginning of the classes to help just kind of activate their physical nature in their body. Let's go to the next slide. We talk about group agreement again, really important, a couple of highlights, just really like positively reinforcing following the group agreement, giving teens and young people just like a good job for following something that they put out there as far as their expectation can be really, really helpful. And adding things to the group agreement, oftentimes you don't know what you kind of want as a group until you encounter something. And so you can always add to that and build on it. And we found that really, really helps keep the teens engaged. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I do see that question there just now, and I'll definitely answer that. So we're talking about modeling the appropriate behavior. So we want to kind of, talk the talk and walk as well. So we want to acknowledge that like teens like catching adults in mistakes. They like kind of gotcha moments, and sometimes that's what they're going for, but other times really what they're doing is just seeing what the boundary is for this class, trying to figure out like what can we talk about, what can I say, and will it get a reaction? Because if it gets like a normal reaction, like, yeah, that's just something we'll talk about, it's not too inappropriate, or it's not too taboo, then they might be more willing to bring it up. They don't want, like, sometimes they want to know that they won't be met with like shock, just so that they feel more comfortable answering it. So yeah, really trying to model our appropriate behavior there. Let's go to the next slide. And I've kind of concluded here with a couple of the important skills for facilitators, things that I've identified in folks that really is super helpful. So again, to summarize, patience, flexibility is really important as well. And then using humor, just to kind of, again, be a real human being with the teens in these programs has really helped. Often we get so in our heads about, are we saying the right thing, or are we giving them the exact right answer? It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to acknowledge and work through it with teens or with participants or youth. Another really key thing that I've found to be really helpful is taking advantage of teachable moments. So teens will ask questions, or youth will ask questions to us, and it refers to something in the, we're going to talk about in a future class. But when the topic is up there, don't hesitate to also talk about it then, to take advantage of that moment of engagement. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I know we're going to do questions later, and I'll be happy to answer questions in the chat. I just wanted to thank folks who are involved, and yeah, it's been a pleasure teaching prep. I hope to be able to continue to do that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in the chat or in the Q&A part of the presentation. So thanks again. And I will be passing off to Jose and team for the next couple slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Cisneros. Like Alex said, we are conducting programming in Southern California. This is our 4th year of servicing youth out here. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to John and Arena, who will actually explain our program and how the process works, and actually recruit and retention is key. So John, it's on you now.
It would help if I'm not muted. So my name is John Lewis. I'm with Urban Strategies, and I'm part of the Futuro Now Project Rise team that's made up of a collaborative. And so if you jump to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the collaborative. So Teleku, which is the East Los Angeles Community Union, which is the funder or the applicant, and Urban Strategies have worked together for the last 12 years in developing collaboratives around different aspects in the Latino community here in the greater Los Angeles area. And that's included healthy marriage work, fatherhood work, job stuff, and we've been working in the sexual risk SRAE funding for the last couple of years. And so with that, we have 9 different partners that actually implement the program. And so Urban Strategies and Teleku oversee the project, and those that are implementing, kind of like the hub that just kind of shared, are 9 different agencies. Some of them are Boys and Girls Clubs, some of them are faith-based organizations, some of them are an array of different aspects, and they're kind of spread throughout Los Angeles County. So we serve about 1,300 youth a year, and we use the Curriculum Love Notes, SRA. And so each of those 9 agencies that are implementing Love Notes in the community have the ability to do that, whatever works best for them, whether it's after school, 4 days or 5 days a week, or once a week, or we have one partner who owns a camp in the mountains, so they'll take kids to retreats and do it over retreat. Some do it over the multiple weekends. So each of those different partners kind of get to decide how they would want to do that. So that's a little bit about Futuro Now Project Rise. On to the next slide. And so when we wrote these last two grants that we got SRE funding for, one of the questions that we wanted to ask within a local evaluation was, is there a difference between gender-based groups? So all male groups or all female groups or co-ed groups? And so we kind of got delayed in starting that research aspect with this, just because of the worldwide global pandemic called COVID. Kind of everybody was just trying, we had to, serve about 1,000 kids. So we were like, we weren't worried really if they were in gender-based groups at first. We were just like, we need to serve kids. And so did our best job of that. So this last year, we've really began to focus and work with our 9 partners about each of them. The goals within the local evaluation is to serve at least 50% of their youth in gender-based groups, and then 50% or less in the co-ed groups. And so that's where we began to dive into the local evaluation. And I'm going to pass it over as the next slide goes to Jose, just to kind of talk about some of the stories that we're hearing from these gender-based groups, and then we'll move on to Arena from WestEd, which is our outside research agency.
Yeah, thanks, John. So what we do is we ask our partners for a monthly report, and on that monthly report, we ask them to submit a success story. And a success story could be anything from student A is no longer gonna have sex because he sees the importance of starting not with the kid, but actually going to school, how important that is. So this is a quote from one of our participants that was shared from one of our partners. I've shared my workbook with some of my friends and sisters, showing them signs of red flags and how our relationship can end up being like a bad volcano explosion. They also said, I've been able to share with some of my friends whose boyfriends like to control, who they talk to is very unhealthy, and know it for me and when I'm ready to have a boyfriend. I'm sure to be picky and choosing him, but not in any hurry. Now, remember, these are quotes from 12 to 19-year-olds. So this could have been from a 12, 13-year-old, but that's who we want to target, right? We want to get them early and say how important it is, not to start off in a bad relationship, to look for red flags. And with that, John.
All right, so Arenas with WestEd, which is our research agency that works with us on all of our different projects. So Arena will kind of dive into some of the initial data that we're seeing this year from, she's just going to talk mostly about, all about just the male data and not the female data at this point.
Hi, everyone. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so as part of the evaluation, WestEd is conducting focus groups and surveys to understand the youth's perspectives and experiences of the Project Rise program. And as part of the focus groups, we've spoken with male youth who participated in the single gender Project Rise lessons. These are the all male Project Rise lessons taught by male facilitators. And what we've heard so far is that the male youth feel comfortable in the single gender Project Rise lessons, and that they appreciate that the facilitators protect the privacy of the single gender groups. And we've also heard from just a handful of males that they feel like the single gender classes were missing the female perspective and that they could learn from the opposite sex. However, they also felt that having females could detract from the overall group comfort. Next slide. And here are some example quotes from the male youth who participated in the all-male Project Rise lesson. I think single gender classes change the class in a good way because you're more comfortable with what you're saying and you don't get judged by females or males. The single gender classes have more trust since some of us could relate to each other, and I felt safe with the conversations. Next slide. Another thing that came out was the importance of having a skilled facilitator who can connect and relate to the youth's experiences and who are also skillful in facilitating open and honest conversations. Having sat through a lot of these focus groups, it's clear how impactful it was having a very good facilitator and that they especially connected with one male facilitator. And below are some example quotes. My experience with my facilitator was that he was really good. They were understanding when it came to our feelings or experiences. They were relatable and shared similar experiences. A good facilitator is comfortable talking about relationships, as well as charismatic to keep others involved and interested in the lessons. And then the third one, the youth is talking about his facilitator. He was cool, relatable, kept the conversation going. He put things in ways that we understood. He was a great teacher. A good facilitator is someone who interacts with their students and makes them feel welcome, always upbeat. And they said their facilitator's name here. He did an exceptional job at this. I felt invited whenever I joined the meetings, and I always felt included in the conversation. And the last youth summarized it nicely by saying that his facilitator made him feel connected with the Project Rise program. Next slide. So on the previous slide, I discussed the focus group findings about the youth's positive experiences with the facilitators, such as the facilitators being relatable, engaging, and able to put things in ways that the youth can understand and connect with. These focus group findings align with the responses that we've seen so far on the exit survey questions asking about their experiences in the program. So the male youth responded on the exit survey that they felt respected as a person all of the time in Project Rise, with an average score of 3.7 on the 4-point scale, where one is none of the time and 4 is all the time. So almost all the youth were responding that they felt respected in Project Rise all of the time. And the youth were satisfied with the program all of the time as well. And this was measured by questions such as, how often did you feel the material presented was clear? And how often did the discussions or activities help you learn program lessons? Next slide. So the survey questions on the previous slide asked about youth experiences in the program. Now I'm going to turn to the preliminary outcome data, which was also measured by the exit survey that the youth took at the very end of the program. And to measure the outcomes, the youth responded to a set of behavioral questions, with one being the Project Rise program made them much less likely to carry out a behavior, and 5 being the program made them much more likely to carry out the behavior. And these were questions that were taken from the required SRAE performance measure survey. And so we have a small sample size so far, just 25 male youth who participated in the all-male Project Rise lessons. But so far, the preliminary survey outcomes have been positive, and they show that the Project Rise program made the male youth somewhat more likely to much more likely to engage in self-regulation and positive decision-making. So this is like thinking about the consequences before making a decision, or working together to find a solution when you disagree with a friend. The Project Rise program made the male youth much more likely to engage in goal setting. So that's like making plans to reach their goals or caring about doing well in school. The program made them somewhat more likely to speak up about bullying and to feel comfortable to talk to their parents, guardians, or caregivers about sex. The program made them much more likely to better understand what makes a relationship healthy. Next slide. And just continuing, the program made them much more likely to talk to others about and resist dating violence and coercion. And the program made them somewhat more likely to, much more likely to follow the success sequence. And those are things like planning to have a steady full-time job before having a child or getting married, or planning to be married before having a child. Next slide. And lastly, for the outcomes, a little bit more than half of the youth, 56% of the male youth, plan to abstain from sex as a result of being in the Project Rise program. And for those who plan to abstain, the following reasons were very important to them, such as the risk of getting someone pregnant or getting an STI, the possible social and emotional consequences, and how it might affect their plans for the future. And now I'm going to pass it back to Jose for the next slide, or John.
I'll read it, Arena. It's just another quote from one of our teens. Project Rise has helped me realize how important it is setting my goals and values now at 13 years old. I love playing soccer and wouldn't want unhealthy choices to affect my passion for playing. I don't want to be a teenage dad, or drop out. And once again, this is some of the success stories that our partners are sharing with us on a monthly basis. John?
Yeah, and so we can go on to the next slide, and I think that just wraps it up in regards to, I think, we're very interested to see kind of how this goes as we continue, probably, serving about 400 or 500 youth, male youth, over the rest of this grant period, and see how that data kind of flows. I think the biggest thing was kind of our assumption was that going into this, and I think Arena and me had talked about it before, was that girls were probably going to like, same gender, to keep the guys out of the group and have those discussions. But I think what we found in the multiple focus groups we've already done is that the guys actually do also. And so that the actual girls could be a distraction, or maybe they don't want to ask a question that while the girls are in the room. And so just thinking in regards to the context of this webinar, it actually may help in recruitment, maybe not and maybe having the girls in another room down the hallway so they could have lunch together or see each other in passing. Because when we did run the gender-based groups during breaks, we always, at least the room that I was in, we always had all the girls wanted to come into our room and see what was going on, and then we'd have to kick them all out back to their sessions. And so, but yeah, so that kind of wraps up this, and I think we can head on into the Q&A back with Michelle.
Thanks, John, Arena, and Jose for sharing your experience, and thank you to Alex as well. There is a question in the chat. How does this compare to those who participated in inclusive classes? Are these classes available to all youth who identify as male or are in transition?
We haven't, we've just pretty much, it's gender-based is how this research has been. So whatever they identify with, they could go to that male class if that's what they identify with. There isn't like some type of, of not allowing them into the class. So if anyone wants into that class, they can go into that class. And Arena can ask if that changes up any aspect of research aspects with that.
Or how does this compare to those who participate in inclusive classes? So far, what we've seen in the previous grants when they used mixed gender classes was that they were very positive as well. We are hearing the focus groups that, like what John mentioned, is that the females really like the same gender classes, and we're starting to hear more from them as well.
All right, thanks for that response. Does anyone else have a question for our speakers, for any of our speakers? Feel free to raise your hand using the reaction feature down at the bottom of Zoom, or you can just unmute yourself and share your question. I will also take them in the chat. For my speakers, there was a note earlier about specifics on facilitation content or addressing the binary effects of gender roles. That came through the chat a little bit earlier. It's not formulated right now in a question, but just wondering if there are any strategies that you might be able to share related to addressing the binary effects of gender roles. And if the person who mentioned that in the chat would like to speak up and clarify, that would be welcomed as well. Russell, that was Russell.
I'll share a little bit about how young people view gender in much more a spectrum than the way I was raised in terms of binary. And this is where they inform our thinking. And these are the things that we reinforce with them. So we have in 2 schools, we still do some incubator work on this work through one of the curriculum that SAMHSA, evaluated, or SAMHSA sees as an evidence-based program. And one of the things that we discovered is that they're very aware of the binary constraint, right? And so we have included in there that basically living constrained in one realm is being stuck, right? And so that they have to figure out with themselves about how it is that they're going to slide on those things at any given moment. And that at any given moment in their life, they may be somewhere along that spectrum. And we think it's healthy for them to do this self-examination process about how it is. There have been, that we know how and knew walking in, 2 instances where young people were in different stages of their transition as trans individuals that chose to identify as males and be in that program. And so there was some prep work that we had to do with the group and make sure that that space was safe. But it was not as challenging as some of the adults thought it was going to be. Young people today are in a much better place than where I would have been comparatively at my age and stage with them. And so part of it is that they have invited us to really, for all of us, to discover how it is that we live with this idea of a spectrum. And where is it that we are at any given time? And that's a gift that these young people that I'm going to give credit to that are much more advanced than us, that how it is that they inform this work. And the fears that we sometimes harbor are not realities, because I'm hopeful of the future based on the young people that I'm around these days, that they have worked to overcome some of the things that were really struggles for those of us that were growing up many, many years ago. So, part of it is really creating, and Alex and everybody reinforced it, the ability to create safe environments where conversations can flow and you can help facilitate and guide it in respectful ways. This goes to the question of facilitator skills. And the one thing I would say is that as much as we invest in training for content, training for facilitation skills is equally important, if not more, for all of the reasons that Alex gave us many tools to use, and that's all facilitation. None of that is context, but he knows how to weave that in perfectly.
Great point, Hector, and I agree in terms of Alex's facilitation skills. Any other questions for our speakers? So we've got Errol, not a question, but I found it refreshing and rewarding that 56% of teens are now choosing to wait. The pressure and acceptability of their environment today and what others consider normal don't have to be their choices. Yes. Thank you for that comment, Errol. I have placed you can go on to the next slide, please, Patrick. The contact information of our speakers is here. They are all welcome to you reaching out to them if you have any questions or additional needs after today. I am going ahead and pasting the link to the evaluation in the chat once more. Please take your time to complete the evaluation. It's just a few questions, should take less than 5 minutes, and we really do appreciate your feedback. And we do take that into consideration as we plan for future webinars. On behalf of all of the guests and FISB and RTI, I want to thank our presenters so much for your time and expertise today. Hector, Alex, Jose, John, and Arena, it was a pleasure to have you joining us. And thank you again. Have a great day, everyone.